The rain moved sideways in sheets, driving hard against the angled glass of the control tower. Wind hissed through seams in the steel walls, rattling loose binder clips and echoing faintly through the overhead vent grills. Jessie stood in the back corner, hands folded behind her flight suit, the black fabric slightly faded from salt spray and wear. Her long blonde hair was braided clean and tight, tucked just under the collar, but one strand clung to her temple where the moisture crept in. Her gloves, still looped through her belt, brushed her hip with every shift of weight. She said nothing. She had said nothing all morning. Across the tower, two junior officers leaned over a radar console, tapping rhythmically at the deck rotation schedule. Neither glanced in her direction. She was not on the list. She had been earlier that week. Her name had appeared in clean print between call signs. Same as the others. Then a markup came during the mock flight brief. Someone had flagged a procedural timing deviation that she hadn't even executed. Just questioned. After that, her name was gone, quietly removed, like a note scrubbed off the corner of a clipboard. The sticky tag left in its place read only one thing: observe only. Outside, the deck rolled in slow violence. Whitecaps smacked the hull below. The island structure groaned as the wind changed direction again. Crosswise now, cutting hard into the left approach lane. Spotters adjusted their footing with each shudder of motion. Jets lined the far end of the deck, wings folded, canopies half open. Crews strapping in with the kind of energy that masked nerves under routine. Jessie tracked them all. She had memorized every aircraft's trap number and pitch compensation trim. Her own jet, Sierra 9, sat fueled and idle in Bay 3. The canopy was closed. No one approached it. The deck supervisor walked past the tower window, rain streaking down the back of his helmet. He barked something into his mic, turned toward the aircraft schedule board, and paused. Then he shrugged and kept walking. Jessie's name wasn't there to question. Behind her, someone chuckled low. A launch controller, sleeves rolled up past his elbows, nudged the officer beside him. She's still standing there. They said she was just observing. Probably hoping for a pity launch, the other one replied without looking. Might as well give her a headset and a coloring book. Jessie didn't flinch. She rested one hand lightly on the desk edge, fingertips brushing the corner of the manifest sheet. The red grease pencil nearby had smudged across the wind correction notes when she tried to mark a drop earlier. She had folded the sheet over quietly. No one had noticed. The headset on the table had been left for her as a formality. It was oversized, built for larger heads and bulkier helmets. When she first tried it on, the ear seals had slipped, the mic catching too low on her cheek. One of the junior officers saw, gave a quick grin, and said, "Maybe try the kid size." She had set it down and never picked it up again. Wind speed spiked at deck level, noted at 100.0 knots by the tower sensor before dropping again to 94.6. A technician called it out over the channel, and someone in the back muttered, "Guess we'll find out who's got nerves today." Another voice added, "Not her." Though there was no anger in Jessie's posture, no tension, only the quiet stillness of someone who had already heard worse and knew exactly what she was capable of. She glanced once at the sea, its waves now breaking unevenly, and mentally recalculated the arrestor zone, offset if Cable 3 failed. She knew the spacing. She had run the math by hand during late cycles. She had folded the calculation page into the inside pocket of her suit, even though no one asked for it. The lead jet began final approach. Its call sign came across the deck frequency in clipped syllables. Tower clearance followed. The aircraft was clean, stable, just low enough to cut the worst of the crosswind shears. Jessie stepped slightly closer to the window, keeping to the edge of the wall, out of line with the main console. Her eyes tracked the jet's trajectory as it dipped, then held. The approach looked textbook for 5 seconds. Then the deck pitched hard to starboard, just as the main tires made contact. The hook snapped down. The second arresting cable caught and then whipped free, snapping taut before recoiling to the far side of the trap zone. The tail hook bounced once, missed cable 4 entirely, and the aircraft jerked upward again in a forced wave-off. "Cable 3 failure," someone in the tower said sharply. "Visual confirm," another answered. Jessie's gaze never left the window. She watched the jet climb back into storm-wrapped airspace, wings shuddering against the sheer. The room went quiet for one long breath. Then someone turned toward her. "She's not even rostered." No one else spoke. Not yet. Jessie remained still. The red grease pencil rolled slightly on the table beside her. Her gloves, worn and weathered, rested heavy against her hip. Her name was nowhere on the board. Her jet sat cold. But her eyes had already followed every missed frame of the trap, every angle the others hadn't corrected for, and she knew precisely what came next. She said nothing. Not yet. Jessie had learned to be exact because no one ever gave her room to be imprecise. Her carrier qualification scores had come back ranked first among her class in Crosswind simulation response time and emergency recovery thresholds. She had landed with 100.0% checklist adherence across 3 platform variants. But that had not been enough. 1 month later, she had submitted a challenge quietly, formally to a procedural miscall made by a senior flight instructor during a night approach debrief. The call had flagged her for missing a trim compensation adjustment. Her own telemetry proved she had made the input. The instructor's chart was off by half a second. She submitted the correction, backed it with data, logged it through the chain. The review never happened. The flight board shifted by the end of the week. Jessie's assignments moved off the main rotation. She was listed under standby with no schedule. Sierra 9 was assigned to her. It was one of the oldest A-18s in the fleet, high engine hours and worn interior seals. Other pilots called it cursed. The maintenance crew joked it had more duct tape than titanium. She never laughed at that. She knew its frame better than her own bunk. In the ready room, her name never got called for morning briefs. She stopped raising her hand. She listened. She sat near the back, logging wind data by hand onto a notepad no one asked her to keep. Her notched pencil had 3 sides worn flat from pressure. She marked tailwind offsets based on last season's trap recordings and ran silent calculations for deck oscillation angle versus hook delay. Her handwriting was small and tidy, the numbers stacked without ornament. At night, after the sim rotations ended, she stayed behind. She did not ask for permission. She had memorized the clearance codes during her time shadowing the night tech. She ran the scenarios again, inputting her own variables. Most of her peers adjusted only for headwind and deck pitch. Jessie wrote code variations for diagonal gusts at maximum crosswind drift. She mapped out an alternate landing sequence that used pitch trim, nose flare, and reverse yaw at manual timing. No one reviewed the SIM card. She logged the data under her call sign, left the file in the archive. No one noticed. Her gloves stayed in the drawer, folded clean with the initials stitched in small white thread. JD, looped in tight curves across the inside of the wrist. They had belonged to her first real instructor, a woman named Delaney who flew twin-engine tactical support out of Pensacola before carrier training programs opened more broadly. Delaney had given Jessie the gloves with one sentence: "Do not wait for clearance. Just train until they cannot ignore what you know." Jessie did not talk much. She listened. The other pilots filled the ready room with stories. She memorized the ones that mattered. She learned which jets consistently pulled left on afterburner, which deck crew marked cable tension early. She never corrected anyone. She never interrupted. On her bunk, beneath the mattress edge, she kept a laminated arrestor load diagram. The plastic had frayed along one side from years of folding. The corner bore a smear of ink from her earliest trap note, where she had miscalculated the force differential between cable 1 and 2 during a rolling swell. She had corrected it later, and never forgot the mistake. The mechanics knew her by her silence. They greeted her with nods, passed her tool checks without formality. One of them, a man named Kern, sometimes left updated engine tolerance charts at her station. She returned them annotated. They never spoke about it. She respected that. Her bunk light stayed on later than most. Some nights, she mapped glide paths by hand onto transparent overlays, layering new offsets onto old printed deck outlines. One sheet showed the deck angle under 3 degrees of tilt and a crosswind clocked at 78.4 knots. The notation read, "Flare early. Bleed drift before visual." She had flown it 36 times in the simulator. Once, she flew it with a cold stick, hands shaking from low blood sugar, just to know if it still worked under strain. It did. In the mess hall, she kept to herself. If someone sat next to her, she nodded. If they left, she nodded again. Once, she overheard a junior pilot mutter, "Does she even still fly?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Jessie learned to be exact because it was the only space she had left. Precision became its own language. It made silence bearable. The gloves in her drawer remained untouched, not because she forgot them, but because she had trained her hands to feel every control surface without needing protection. The gloves were for when it counted. Each night, as she crossed the corridor from the ops bay to her quarters, she passed the sim room. Most nights she paused. Some nights, she entered. Once, she caught her own reflection in the glass helmet under arm, face unreadable. She didn't linger. She went back to the notebook and the diagrams and the work that no one would credit. This was not a memory. This was still happening. Her body had adapted to being unseen, but her mind had not stopped flying. She had learned that mastery without invitation is not enough. You must be ready anyway. In the tower, the air shifted suddenly. The deck speaker cracked once, followed by the clipped edge of an urgent call. Cable 3 just snapped wave off unsuccessful. The words landed hard. The room tensed. Jessie's eyes didn't move from the window, but inside her, something clicked. She had run this scenario 100 times. Alternate approach, 3.5-degree pitch delay, manual flare timing, left yaw compensation, hook synchronization offset by half a second. She didn't blink. She remembered every step, and she waited. Alarms buzzed low under the static of carrier comms as the second A-18 circled with fuel levels dropping. On the tower channel, clipped voices overlapped with weather updates, their urgency masked behind rehearsed brevity. The lead jet had waved off after the arresting cable snapped. The backup pattern had failed to initiate. Deck conditions were degrading by the minute. Wind pushed hard across the angled landing surface, gusting crosswise at 82.6 knots. Spray lifted off the ocean in sheets and slapped against the hull with no rhythm. One officer near the board said, without looking up, "We don't have another ready jet cleared for approach." Another voice answered, "Lower. We'll need to rotate them for another circuit, or let the tower make the call." Someone checked the roster, then muttered, "No one has the alternate sequence cleared. Not in this crosswind. Not in time." In the middle of that moment, Jessie stepped away from the tower glass. She didn't announce anything. She didn't wait for a question or ask for a slot. She moved like she always had, quiet, certain, direct. Her gloves were on now. Fingers flexed once to settle the fabric along her knuckles. The initials stitched into the wrist J, D, were darkened. From where? She passed the operations console without pause. One technician turned as if to speak, then stopped. Her flight suit looked the same as always, but something in the way she moved cut through the air. Jessie didn't flinch as she stepped into the stairwell and out into the wind. The flight deck roared with hydraulic hiss and turbine noise. Deck crew scrambled between positions, double-checked tie-downs, resynced launch markers. Sierra 9 sat alone beneath a line of pinned flags and scattered water trails. Its nose faced down the launch rail, already fueled and idle, the yellow tape at its base flapping violently in the gale. Jessie crossed the deck without hurry, each step deliberate, each breath measured. She mounted the ladder in 3 clean motions and dropped into the cockpit with her helmet tucked under one arm. One of the launch officers saw her and barked, "That's not cleared. Sierra 9's not in the rotation." Another crew member, younger, said, "She's not on the board." The first made a move toward the tower channel, but then hesitated. Jesse's voice came across the radio, flat and unshaken. Sierra 9. Confirmed alternate recovery pattern. Ready for launch. Silence followed. It stretched longer than protocol allowed. Inside the cockpit, Jesse adjusted the throttle, ran a full diagnostic sweep, and toggled the manual hook delay input she had rigged into the backup override weeks ago. She checked the tailhook herself visually, then, with a confirmation tap through the indicator light. The tower did not answer her. They did not need to. The deck chief stood near the catapult line, headset in one hand, the other shielding his eyes against the rain. He did not shout. He did not wave her off. He lowered the headset slowly and gave a nod toward the nearest launch team. One of them blinked, then moved. Hands gestured, lines cleared. The last flag dropped. Sierra 9 thundered forward, the launch rail lit in a wash of steam and light. Jesse's breath clouded against the inside of the canopy for just a moment before the outside pressure swept it clear. She was airborne before the last man stepped back from the tie-down coil. Inside the tower, someone said, "What in the hell?" Another voice interrupted, "Let her go. She's already in the wind." Jessie leveled out into the black sky, clouds churning to her right, crosswind profile punching harder than forecasted. She made no comment. Her hands stayed steady. Her breathing matched the rhythm of the flight stick, shallow and even. Below, the deck shifted forward with the pitch of the sea. The arrestor system had one active cable. No other pilot had the approach angle logged for manual pitch sync. Jessie did. She flew clean, alone, and unseen. No one had asked her. No one had given her a command. But the system had failed, and the moment had opened. She was already calculating what they had missed. Timing, yaw, nose flare, the shifting deck arc. Her eyes tracked the movement below. She did not wait for anyone to catch up. She flew. The wind curled in from the northwest, sharp and pulsing, the kind that dragged across the airframe in unpredictable intervals. Rain laced sideways through Jessie's canopy as she leveled into final approach. Her breathing stayed even. One shallow inhale, one slow exhale. Each control surface moved under her hands like memory. She had trained for this in silence, over dozens of nights. Her grip on the flight stick was loose but deliberate, fingertips curved just enough to hold pressure. The gauges flickered as the deck below shifted in uneven rhythm. The carrier rolled 3 degrees to port, then corrected half a point back. The tower called for holding pattern. Jessie didn't respond. The wind vector updated again, now coming in at 91.8 knots. She adjusted rudder trim manually and engaged the alternate hook delay sequence she had written into her notes and simulated without clearance. No one had reviewed it. No one had needed to. The sea swelled under the nose cone. Spray kicked up in ghost shapes around the edge of the landing zone. Ahead, the arresting wires were barely visible through the mist. Only one remained live. The others hung slack and useless. Water puddled along their length. Jessie dropped her altitude 2 meters below standard approach. She synced her glide slope not to the radar recommendation but to the deck pitch she had calculated in her overlays. The deck rolled again. She counted it in her head. 1, 2. She flared early. Her right hand eased the throttle. The other adjusted rudder to counter yaw as the crosswind broke wide at the last second. She kept the nose level and let the airframe drift half a degree off centerline, just enough to bleed the gust without losing forward vector. The first cable snapped past underneath. Her tailhook bounced clean over it. The second looked better. She did not blink. It missed by less than the width of a boot heel. Jessie adjusted nothing. She had expected this. Her hands stayed light on the controls. Her eyes locked on the yellow line blurring beneath the nose. The third cable never had a chance. It lay too loose, too far to the right. Irrelevant. She touched down. The gear hit wet steel with a jolt sharp enough to shake the dash camera. Her posture didn't shift. She corrected the drift angle by instinct. No input needed from the system. Then the fourth cable came. She met it with perfect timing. The hook caught clean. The airframe jolted once hard, then slowed fast and brutal. Her helmet snapped forward, barely kept in check by the restraint harness. She did not speak. She let the jet do what it had been built for, what she had reprogrammed it to do when the margin for error was zero. The Super Hornet came to a complete stop 7 feet from the crash barrier. Inside the cockpit, the instrument panel went still. The trap light flickered once, green through the fogged edge of her visor, then faded to red as the arrestor winch completed its cycle. Outside, the storm pressed down like a hand. No one cheered. The radio stayed quiet. Jessie lifted her hands from the flight stick. Her fingers hovered for a breath, then dropped to her lap. Her visor was fogged around the edges, but her eyes were clear. Rain hissed against the canopy above, steady and unrelenting. The jet was motionless. She had landed. Not lucky, not reckless, not improvised. She had landed because the math was correct and her preparation had no margin for doubt. And the silence that followed was not disbelief. It was recognition, even if no one could say it aloud. Rain continued to fall as the jet's canopy lifted with a mechanical hiss. Steam rose faintly from the exhaust vents, swirling in the thick air before vanishing into the mist that clung to the deck. Jessie sat motionless for a moment, her helmet still on, her hands resting lightly on either side of the console. She ran the post-flight checks without hesitation, flipping switches with clean precision. Each step was logged, confirmed, secured. She didn't look toward the tower or the approaching crew. She kept her focus on the panel, on the checklist she knew by heart. The deck was quiet in a way it rarely was. No shouted callouts, no scramble orders, no clipped commentary, just the low roar of engines from other aircraft in the distance and the hiss of rain on metal. A crew chief walked up first, eyes scanning the arrestor cable behind her. The line still quivered from the tension release. It had held. No one had expected it to. Another figure joined him, then a third. None of them spoke. They stared at the A-18 like it had landed itself. Jessie disconnected the harness and stood up in one smooth movement. She stepped out onto the cockpit ladder, boots pressing against the wet metal rungs with slow certainty. The deck shifted slightly beneath her, still riding the rhythm of the sea, but her footing never wavered. As she reached the bottom, a voice came from somewhere near the catwalk. Quiet, almost unsure. That was a dead cable. Another answered, firmer this time. No, that was a perfect trap. No one disagreed. Jessie stepped onto the non-skid surface and turned toward the nearest crew member. Her helmet was still on, visor up. Through the clear faceplate, her eyes were unreadable. She nodded once, then pulled the helmet free and tucked it under her arm. Her braid was soaked, plastered to the back of her neck. She said nothing. In the tower, the silence was different. Not shocked. Exactly. More like recalibration in real time. The lead flight officer leaned over the edge of the glass, watching the trap zone where the cable still lay curled in slow motion. His voice was low, more to himself than anyone else. She just rewrote the trap sequence. No one responded. Back on the deck, Jessie began walking. The launch officer who had dismissed her earlier stood just outside the safety line, headset still looped around his neck. Forgotten. He opened his mouth as she passed. His lips formed the start of a question. Who cleared you? But the words never made it past the first syllable. He closed his mouth. She didn't slow. Her boots left dark prints across the catwalk. The chalk marks along the catapult faded in the rain behind her. The red light on the nose camera of the jet still blinked steadily, recording every second. One junior crewman turned to another and muttered, "She was never supposed to fly today." His partner shook his head. "Doesn't matter now." Jessie reached the edge of the landing zone and paused. The yellow lines around the trap point were blurred with water, but the imprint of the cable's recoil still traced a faint arc across the surface. She looked at it once, then turned toward the access hatch that led back into the ship's interior. Inside, the steel corridor hummed with generator power and recirculated air. Her flight suit was soaked through, her sleeves clinging to her arms, gloves dripping as she walked. She didn't peel them off yet. There was still salt in the lining, and it would dry stiff if left crumpled. She passed 2 technicians in the hallway. One moved aside without a word. The other glanced down at her boots, then at the helmet under her arm, then quickly looked away. No one saluted. No one had to. She reached the crew bay without breaking pace. The door clicked open, revealing the same benches, lockers, and damp air she had walked through that morning as an observer. Now the room was empty. Her name was still not on the flight board, but her presence had already corrected that. She stepped inside. The overhead lights buzzed faintly. A half-used towel was draped over the back of one chair, and someone had left a dry marker uncapped on the corner table. Jessie crossed to the rack along the wall and placed her helmet down gently, the curved side facing outward. Water ran in small rivulets from the edge, gathering near the base. She adjusted it once so it wouldn't slide. Then she stood still. The silence behind her was total, the kind that didn't ask for noise, the kind that only existed when something final had happened. Her face held no expression. Her hair was matted to her cheek. Her boots were still wet. And nothing else needed to be said. By the time the rain began to ease, Jessie had already changed out of her flight suit and hung it on the rack beside her locker. The fabric was still damp along the shoulders and knees, the salt lines faint, but visible. Her gloves sat on the edge of the shelf. Fingertips curled inward. Water pooled beneath them on a folded towel. She leaned over the flight log table with one hand resting beside her notepad, writing slowly, methodically. Engine temp, trap speed, touchdown vector. The numbers flowed easily. She didn't look up. Across the room, the ready board had been updated. No announcement, no explanation. Her name was there now, tucked between two other call signs. Not at the bottom, not in parentheses. Sierra 9 recovery complete. The room was quieter than usual. The usual banter had faded into uncertain murmurs. A few of the men glanced toward her, some from behind half-raised coffee cups, others from the corners of their eyes. One gave a short nod when she passed. Another moved his feet to let her through without comment. Jessie said nothing in return. The flight chief stood near the forward locker bay, scanning a panel of maintenance requests. As she stepped toward the rear corridor, he shifted to the side without a word. He didn't make eye contact. He didn't need to. She paused briefly at the sink and ran her gloves under a trickle of warm water. Salt washed off in thin streaks. She turned them gently inside out and set them near the fan unit to dry. The initials along the wrist were still visible. J. D. Stitched in pale thread, now darkened from use. They would dry unevenly, but she would reshape them by hand later. One of the mechanics from the lower bay, an older man with weathered hands and grease still under his nails, appeared near the threshold. He didn't walk fully into the room, just stood with a clipboard and tapped the edge of it once with his knuckle. "Stabilizer trim's drifting right," he said. "You mind looking?" Jessie nodded. He handed her the clipboard and left. The pages were smudged, old ink bleeding into the corners. She scanned them slowly, then folded the top sheet down and tucked it under her arm. Outside the ready room, a printed photo had been pinned to the bulletin board. Someone had pulled it from the tower's landing cam archive. It showed Sierra 9 mid-trap, hooked down, spray rising off the deck like smoke. At first, it had no caption. By midday, someone had scribbled a note in red ink along the bottom edge. She caught what no one else would try. No one had signed it. Jessie passed the board without stopping. She returned the stabilizer chart to the lower bay just after lunch. The mechanic didn't speak, only raised an eyebrow. She pointed to the trim relay on the third line. He nodded once, then got to work. It was enough. The hallway lights flickered once as the ship shifted course. Somewhere above, a bulkhead groaned as the carrier took another long swell. The storm was not over, but the worst of it had passed. Back in the crew bay, Jessie folded her notepad and slid it into her locker. Her flight suit now hung dry. She smoothed the sleeves, then reached for her gloves, now firm and shaped again. She checked the seams, then laid them flat on the shelf. She sat on the bench for a long moment, not tired, not reflective, just still. In the corner, one of the junior pilots whispered something to his wingman. The other didn't respond. Their eyes stayed on the floor. Jessie stood and walked to the ready room window. The deck outside was streaked with drying rain, the trap cables reset. chalk marks already repainted. Jets were lined again for the next cycle. Tower signals blinked in quiet rhythm. The wind had picked up again, sweeping across the sea in slow, constant motion. Another recovery run was being prepped. Someone else would fly it. Jessie watched for a moment longer. Then she turned away. Her steps were light, unhurried. She had already landed. Sometimes, the strongest voice is the one that says nothing. Jessie was never given a podium, never handed a spotlight. She was told to watch, to wait, to stay behind. But when the system failed and the wind turned, she stepped forward without asking. Not to prove anyone wrong, but because she had always been right. Her strength was not loud. It lived in preparation, in patience, in the calm certainty of knowing she was ready long before anyone believed it. This story is for anyone who's been overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated. You do not need permission to be excellent. You only need to keep showing up, even when no one is watching. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect. Share your thoughts in the comments, and follow for more stories of quiet resilience, earned redemption, and the power of being undeniable.